Good evening, friends. And over next 5 days, there will be two sets of meetings, and the most important of all among these meetings are the meetings of finance ministers and central bank governors from G20 member countries, invitee countries, as well as from international organizations, heads of the international organizations, on 17th and 18th of July. And those meetings will be held here in Mahatma Gandhi Convention Center. These meetings will be co-chaired by Union Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman and Reserve Bank of India Governor Dr. Shaktikant Das. I'll come to other meetings in a moment, but first, what is expected to be covered in these meetings. As you recall, that when the ministers and governors met for the first time under the Indian G20 presidency in Bengaluru in the month of February, they had mandated that what would be the important topics for further research, study, finding the way forward during the course of the year when India has the presidency. Since February, very significant amount of work, a body of work has been done by various working groups. They have completed several of their deliverables. Those have been discussed in those working groups, and those will be presented to the ministers and governors. They will deliberate upon those reports and then take a view as to how to move forward for better global cooperation on the economic issues and core finance issues. As a preparatory to the meeting of ministers and governors, for 2 days, on 14th and 15th July, finance deputies and central bank deputies will be discussing it. While they will discuss some of the reports aspects also, but most of their time is expected to be devoted for finalizing the outcome document. And the core part of the discussion would be to take a view on the various deliverables, what the various reports have been prepared, how to move forward on that. Overall, it is expected, and that is a day of 16th is yet left, and after I do the main part, then I'll come to what will happen on 16th of July. A number of events are there. But overall, we expect that more than 500 delegates, including finance ministers, central bank governors, their deputies, other delegates will be attending, and in total, 66 delegations would be there. So while it is G20, but there are other countries who have been invited. There are permanent invitee countries, there are international organizations all put together 66 delegations and more than 500 delegates. The main meeting on 17th and 18th of July, which is Finance Minister and Central Bank Governors meeting, have 5 thematic sessions. Day 1 will have 2 sessions and day 3 will have 3 sessions. The first 2 sessions, which will be held on 17th, are global economy and global health. And this is a very critical and important session because, as we are aware, that the present difficult times for the global economy, difficulty in terms of uncertainties require policy coordination among major economies. So there's global economy and of course global health, that though the pandemic is behind us, but in terms how to be better prepared in case there's another pandemic were to come in, the preparedness, that will be the core part of discussion in the first session. Second thematic session, which will happen on 17th afternoon, is on sustainable finance and infrastructure. These are two different topics, but will be discussed together. Sustainable finance from the perspective of sustainable development goals, as well as from the climate action. And infrastructure, as you are aware, that Indian presidency had proposed, which was very readily agreed by the G20, to give it a theme of financing cities of tomorrow. So on that theme also there will be discussion, which will be on the second session. The next day, the meetings will start with the third session, which will be on the international financial architecture. And that international financial architecture is about multilateral development bank, IMF, and other such bodies which have the global mandate. That will also discuss the debt vulnerabilities being faced by several low-income countries and some of the middle-income countries also, how to move forward on providing debt restructuring from them. Fourth session will be on international taxation. Intense discussions have been happening for the last several years. There is some movement, etc. We'll see that what is the outcome. So there is a fourth session would be there. And the last session in the afternoon is on financial sector issues and financial inclusion. And if you recall that financial inclusion is covered by Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, GPFI, and there was an agreement reached in the month of April that India would get the chair of GPFI as one of the co-chairs. There are two co-chairs for the period of 3 years, 2024 to 2026. And then, of course, the financial sector issues, which also include the digital assets, will also be discussed, plus digital public infrastructure, where India and several other countries have done huge amount of work, plus the fast payment systems, how to interlink them, that will be discussed on the fifth session. So these are the 5 sessions will be there. Then there are few key deliverables are there. There are several of them, and then you will get to know on 18th as they are released at the time of the closing press conference, or in the middle as we have the discussion. But the most important them would be the volume 1 of the report of the Indian G20 Independent Expert Group on strengthening multilateral development bank. Now, as you recall, that Indian presidency had proposed such group, which was again very readily agreed by the membership, and that independent expert group is co-convened by Mr. N.K. Singh, which all of us are well aware, and Professor Larry Summers from the USA. And there are another 7 eminent members to that group. So that group has submitted this report. It has been circulated to membership. That would be deliberated upon, and we expect that report would be in public domain on 18th evening. The second key deliverable is a debt treatment for countries under the common framework. That will be the second deliverable. Third one is that how to deal with a guidance note for developing a globally coordinated framework for regulation and supervision of digital assets or crypto assets. Fourth one is on a recommendations on taking forward financial inclusion and productivity gains through digital public infrastructure, so that the people at the last mile get covered. So that will be the fourth key deliverable. And the fifth one, which I alluded in the beginning, is about the principles of financing cities of tomorrow. And I would like to elaborate, it is not about constructing new cities, it is about transforming our existing cities. New cities may also get formed, but the focus is on transforming our cities. Then I'll come to what happens on 16th. And there are a number of side events. They are called side events because they are along with the main events are happening, but in itself, each one of them is important event. The first, a very important event, which will be held in Gift City here in Gandhinagar, is an infrastructure investors dialogue, wherein participation of the private sector in big numbers is expected. And the theme of that dialogue, and it's a day-long dialogue, is on leveraging funding and financing mechanism and approaches for cities of tomorrow. And that will be in the morning on 16th at Gift City. As part of that dialogue, in the afternoon, there will be a ministerial session wherein our finance minister will deliver an opening address. Thereafter, Indonesian finance minister will give a keynote address, and President World Bank will be giving the closing remarks, and then there would be panel discussion. That will be, I understand, at 3:30 in the afternoon at the Gift City as part of the investor dialogue. That event is there. The second event, which will also be held in Gift City, is a high-level tax symposium, and high-level means it is a ministerial and the governor-level symposium on combating tax evasion, corruption, and money laundering. And that event, if I recall, is from 5 o'clock, 5 to 6:30 at the Gift City. Then there is a round table on 17th evening on crypto assets, taking forward the policy discussion. As you recall, India has been on the forefront of bringing the macroeconomic perspective to entire discourse in organizing meetings and discussions in each of the ministerial FMCBG meetings in February, April, and even now, that will be a round table being organized. Then there is a round table on 14th morning, tomorrow, which is for the deputies on the G20 expert group on strengthening MDBs. Their report will be discussed among the deputies. Besides this, these side events, which are in the form of a round table or a symposium, there are two workshops. First workshop is on interlinking fast payment systems, and as you recall, that India and Singapore have not just agreed, but have also connected their fast payment systems. And without getting into a very elaborate banking channel part, from one's mobile to another mobile, the bank account transfers can happen. And the discussions are on with others, India with others, other countries with others, and there are several such examples are being talked about. The second workshop is on, which will be held here in this center itself, and both the workshops are here, achieving growth-friendly climate action and financing for emerging and developing economies. Chief Economic Advisor to all of you. I'll stop here and will request whether Dr. Anand would like to come in.
Good evening, everybody. So I think Secretary Mr. Ajay Seth very clearly shared with you what are all the topics we are going to be discussing. And of course, at the end of the 5 days, first 2 days of deputies discussions, and then the day allocated for side events, and then the 2 days for finance ministers and central bank governors to deliberate. The outcomes will be shared with you on the 18th. The important thing for us to remember is that a forum such as the G20 is relevant by the mere fact that it exists in these times, because it provides a platform for us to discuss issues which cut across national boundaries, such as, for example, what he mentioned about the regulation of cryptos. Because by their very nature, they easily move across borders. So one country cannot take a stance independently without the cooperation of the others. So a forum such as this is the most ideal one because it represents almost 75 to 80% of global GDP. Similarly, you take a look at, for example, a topic such as how to reform institutions that were set up in 1945 after the World War II, such as the World Bank, other institutions. And we know that even in this state, Many projects have been funded with the assistance of World Bank and other institutions. But at the same time, we also know that there are issues now which not only require funding for traditional infrastructure, but also for climate-related specific infrastructure. And therefore, at the same time, we know the pandemic had created such a huge setback for growth for many countries. Not for India, we have come out far better than others, but for many other countries. Therefore, institutions such as this have to finance those traditional requirements, education, health, traditional infrastructure, but the opportunity to meet and even discuss, even if we don't conclude or agree, is a very important thing to remember in itself. And that is my initial remark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll have a few questions. Kindly raise your hand so that the mic reaches you. Arup.
Good evening, sirs. In the last to last FMCBG in Bengaluru, while all the nations were supportive of India achieving all the targets and all the agenda items set, all the communication was that everyone wants India to succeed. However, there was no communique in that meeting. There was a chair summary. In the intervening period, whatever working group meetings and other meetings you have had, how, after all this, how confident are you that in this meeting of FMCBG, you can actually reach a communique instead of a chair statement? Have you reached more of an agreement on various issues to get to a communique?
I'll try to put your observation in a perspective. The role of the presidency is to lead the efforts to build global consensus. There was a very strong desire and continues to be a very strong desire that all countries should continue to work together and under the Indian presidency to find that consensus. And if you recall that on all items of the core agenda before the ministers and governors, common grounds were found. One particular issue on which common ground could not be found is the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine on the global economy, on which common ground could not be found. Two of the member countries had a different stance on that particular observation. So I'll put it here that on several items, everything except one, where the differences were there, only on one item, and the efforts are on, not just in the finance track, but even in other tracks also, Sherpa track and other working groups, and those issues will also be discussed over the course of next 5 days.
Next question.
Good evening, sir. I'm Kriti from Informist Media. So you mentioned there will be an investors dialogue scheduled on 14th. So Sunday, I guess, yeah. So what kind of investment can we see after this dialogue, especially when the foreign direct investment has contracted in last 9 of the 8 months?
Okay, first of all, that investor dialogue is on 16th, and that event is open to the media, unlike other meetings which are the closed door meetings. The second, the events of G20 are not about, these are about policy coordination. It is about how to find ways to the current challenges or the impending challenges of the future which are known. It is not about instant results where investors come, sit down with a particular country and say, let's do a deal. It is not about, the forum is different. It is trying to find a solution. Just to give an example, financing cities of tomorrow is a huge challenge, not just for India, for all developing countries, and even for developed countries, how to transform their cities to less energy intense cities and what kind of investments are needed, how to find financing for them. So these are not about investment deals, but it's saying what models can work. Pure private sector, public sector, mix of the two, whether the land reform, not land reform, for urban reforms, that the value, the wealth getting created through urban development can be unlocked. or can be channelized to finance. So these are the issues which get discussed. So my expectation, or rather my suggestion would be, don't look for numbers, look for where the movement is happening in terms of finding sustainable ways of financing.
Just wanted to comment on your comment as FDI having fallen. Globally, for example, in developed economies, FDI fell by 37% last year. So we are talking in the context of a reduction in the global FDI flows. It was not specific to India.
Yes, Janni.
Good evening, sirs. So you had mentioned that one of the 5 areas would be sustainable finance and infrastructure. Just wanted to get a sense on what could be some of the things that would be put up in this. I asked this in the context of how some advanced countries are putting up trade barriers, carbon border barriers, and this is adversely impacting developing countries. So just to get a sense on what could be some of the lines of the broad lines of the discussion when we say sustainable finance.
See, when we talk about sustainable finance, as the Minister mentioned it, this had 2 pillars or 2 elements to it. One is financing of sustainable development goals as well as financing of climate action. Now, apart from the financing, one of the possible ways, not saying that these ways are mutually exclusive to each other, is through carbon pricing or a taxation. You talked about carbon border adjustment mechanism. At the same time, there are non-policy levers also, and which are non-monetary routes which can be followed. So the course of the discussion, which has been discussed during the course of the year, and in particular in the framework working group, which Dr. Anant co-chairs, has been that non-pricing measures, how important they are and what role they can play. And especially in developing economies, or to some extent even in developed economies, where alternatives to the current energy sources are not available, to what extent market forces can deliver any other alternative. Those are also very much under discussion.
Yes, please.
Hi, sir. This is Sagar from Informist. In the meeting which was held in Bangalore, we saw a lot of communication on many countries being interested in India's CBDC, digital currency. So what sort of progress can we see this time around?
So there are 2 parts. The Reserve Bank of India and several, or at least I'll say few, central banks have started with central bank digital currencies. Now, Reserve Bank of India, as you are aware, has started pilots for CBDC wholesale as well as CBDC retail. And both are, the results are being collated, and similar manner, other countries are doing so. CBDCs done by various central banks have the potential of providing interlinking of or providing ways for payments across the borders. So that is one way of doing the thing. These are the early years, but because they are the fiat currencies, they have the largest amount of potential to provide interlinking or the cross-border payments, that the potential is there. The other one is about the traditional way of the fast payment system, like UPI, or Brazil has PIX, Singapore have their own system. Meaning that those systems can be connected through building bridges across the banking system of the 2 countries. So these are 2 different things. One is based on the blockchain technology, other one is based on the traditional technology. So these both work is happening on both. And as you recall, that India has achieved huge amount of financial inclusion by using DPIs. So fair amount of traction is happening on DPIs. And what India has done, and if you recall, IMF has come out with a study paper, and which was, paper came out in April. And in the month of August, there will be a dissemination session through VCs, connecting with countries in Asia as well as in Africa, and that session will be led from Delhi.
Hi, sir. Siddharth from Money Control here. Just to follow up on the CBDC, a lot of countries are participating in pilots with the BIS on cross-border payments using CBDCs. Like you mentioned, the RBI's pilots are domestic. Is there any reticence or any caution from the government, from India, in being part of these these international pilot projects when it comes to CBDCs?
As you recall, the union budget mentioned about CBDC, and that was the last year's budget. Government, the provision was created in the RBI Act itself to facilitate use of CBDC. It is not just about within the country, but across the border connectivity also. So there is absolutely no hesitation. This is a technology which has got the potential for the future. Then obviously all central banks are working, those who have taken the initiative, how the fiat digital currency can be the medium for cross-border payments. And the purpose is that the cost of cross-border payments can it be brought down. Traditionally, global average used to be about 7 to 8%. India, because of its large size, has already brought it down, if I recall, to between 3 to 4%, but perhaps there's a potential to go down further. And perhaps when Dr. Patra, my colleague, deputy from Central Bank, is with us on one of the sessions, he will be in a position to throw more light on this. I'm noticing that all people or all the journalists with the questions are on this side. There's nothing on that side. So perhaps.
Any question from this side? If you can ask.
Yeah. Sir, now various countries are forming their trade blocs. They are using their own currencies for payment settlement. De-dollarization is happening. Will that be discussed in G20?
Okay. I don't see it as a move away from any currency. This is not the correct way of doing so. The attempt is when the two countries are doing trade, either in goods or services, they are exploring possibilities whether the trade can also be denominated in their respective currencies. Because if we say that even for us, how much something cost, tell us a rupee, we can make a mental makeup. Tell the same value in dollars, most of us will have to do some computation to arrive at how much does it cost. Similar manner, when the exporters and importers are talking about in respective currencies and settling it, the desire is to do it in the bilateral basis. It is not a move against any particular currency. And of course, when it comes to that, two countries which have got that flows of currencies across the two borders are not even. Obviously, they have to go to the third world currency, not third world currency, a third currency, which most likely will be a reserve currency.
I'll just add to what Secretary said. I mean, you made it sound as if de-dollarization is a reality, but it is not. And the Invesco, which is one of the world's largest asset managers, comes out with a survey of sovereign wealth funds, which control more than $21 trillion of assets under management. So the sovereign wealth fund annual survey by Invesco is available publicly. And they have some discussion on this, the question that you posed. It will be interesting for you to take a look at it.
So now that there are no questions, we conclude this session. Thank you all for being present here. Kindly join us for tea in the adjacent space. Thank you.
Nicholas Barr, who is a journalist with Lee's Eco, is joining us. He just interviewed Prime Minister Modi ahead of his departure from India to France. Nicholas, many thanks for joining us. The interview is in French. We await the